Hi, Ben Darby here from Darby and Darby Solicitors, and welcome to my vlog on lasting powers of attorney. Lasting powers of attorney are incredibly useful, helpful, sensible, but powerful documents. In short, they are a document whereby you appoint someone or a number of people to manage your affairs if you're unable to do so. Now, none of us plan that later in life that we might struggle to manage our own affairs or even expect to be incapable of managing our own affairs. But the reality is, as our population gets older, it's more and more likely that we will struggle to manage those affairs, whether it's through mental capacity, your mental ability to make decisions for yourself, or through physical restrictions in your life, meaning you need some support or help. Now, powers of attorney are the documents that are needed to help you manage your affairs if you're unable to do so yourself. The law was changed in 2007, so if you have a power of attorney under the old system, which if you look at will be called an enduring power of attorney, and it was completed before October 2007, and you are happy with its content, then it's still valid, and that can be used by your attorneys to help you manage your affairs. However, if you didn't do an enduring power of attorney before 2007, or you want to change the people you're appointed in that old power of attorney, then the only option available to you now are lasting powers of attorney. Now, before I go on to explain lasting powers of attorney, I think it's important to note very briefly now why you should have them. If you don't have a lasting power of attorney in place, and if a loved one, someone close to you, needs to make decisions on your behalf because you're suddenly taken ill, then if the lasting power of attorney is not in place, then the only alternative they have is to apply to the court for what is called deputyship. Now, deputyship has the same powers effectively as lasting powers of attorney, but instead of you appointing someone, the court is appointing that person. As a result, because the court is much more involved, it's a much longer process. The last one I did for deputyship, roughly about 10 to 12 months from start to finish, and it's a much more expensive process. It could end up costing a couple of £1,000s to do a deputyship application. Now, if you've got the opportunity then to avoid that and you want to put your affairs in order, then the lasting powers of attorney are what you should be looking at putting in place. There are two types of powers of attorney, one for property and finance and one for health and welfare. I'll deal with each of those individually in a moment, but something I want to cover in relation to both of them because it is the same for all of them. To appoint someone as either property and welfare or property and finance or health and welfare, then there's a number of issues you have to go through. One, you need to choose your attorneys. Now, I would suggest you choose more than one. You could have one with a substitute or a couple that act together. But the other thing to bear in mind, different than you're writing a will, you don't have to have your executors to your will agree to be an executor. When you're writing a power of attorney, you do need your attorneys to agree, and they will have to sign the form agreeing to be your attorney. The next thing to bear in mind is when choosing your attorneys, you want to choose people that you trust to make decisions on your behalf. So people that you trust with your finances or with decisions around your health, that know what your decisions might be if you were capable of doing it, and also that you trust to manage your money effectively. One thing I should point out here, if any of your chosen attorneys are bankrupt, they will not be able to act because the court will check whether or not they are subject to a bankruptcy. But the truth is, if someone is subject to bankruptcy, it shows that they were unable to manage their own personal affairs, perhaps, and then as a result, they're probably not best placed to be managing yours. The other thing to bear in mind with all your powers of attorney is they take nothing away from you. You still have the power to manage your own affairs, even if you appoint people as your attorneys. They're almost there, to use a football or a rugby analogy, as a substitute. They're people who step in to help and support you when you want them to. The other thing to bear in mind is when your attorneys are appointed, they will be reminded by the court and by information that's available to them that they must always act in your best interests. So any decisions they make in and around your finance, in and around your health, must be in your best interest, not their best interest. And I say that because sometimes you might be appointing a spouse or a partner or a child to be your attorney, and sometimes what is in their best interest can conflict with what's in your best interest. But the primary purpose is for them to act in your best interests at a time when you're unable to make decisions for yourself. Right. The first type of power of attorney I'm going to deal with is property and finance. Now, property and finance powers of attorney are probably the most popular forms of power of attorney that we do. Looking at the figures from the courts in the last 12 months, the majority, only just, but more than half of powers of attorneys granted were for property and finance. Now, this is a document that appoints someone to help you with your banking, with your pensions, and can even give them the power to sell your house and invest the money if that's the power you want them to have. Now, you can give directions and you can give restrictions on that power, so you can tell them what you do and don't want to do. My personal view, you would only put directions and restrictions in if they're absolutely necessary, because ultimately, if you're appointing someone to make a decision for you, you're appointing someone you trust. I would definitely recommend you appoint more than one attorney in relation to property and finance, and you can appoint them jointly, so they must make all decisions together, or jointly and severally. I would recommend jointly and severally, because then they could act alone to deal with perhaps some smaller decisions around weekly shopping and spending money that way, but then they could act together in making big decisions like selling properties. The second type, and the other type of powers of attorney, is the health and welfare power of attorney. So this is the document that will enable your attorneys to make care decisions on your behalf and medical decisions on your behalf. It's a separate application to court, it's a separate document, so it doesn't have to be the same people with the finance, and you would have different considerations about this. And why I say that is one of the things that's contained in the health and welfare power of attorney is the ability for your attorneys to make end-of-life decisions for you. So those decisions when you're in hospital, incapable of making a decision about whether or not your care should be extended or stopped, that can be passed on to your attorney when you sign your power of attorney. Clearly, that's a discussion you must have with your attorney before they sign, and you have the choice in the power of attorney to either give them the ability to make that decision or exclude that ability so they cannot make that decision. But that's something you should discuss with your attorney. But if you have strong views about do not resuscitate or strong views over the care you should receive at the end of life, you should let your attorneys know, and you can put that in as power of attorney. But the important thing about health and welfare power of attorney is it gives your attorneys the power to choose your care if you're unable to choose it yourself. So if that you have strong views in your life that you want to have care at home or care in a care home or a certain standard of care, you can communicate that to your attorneys, and when they're appointed and if they're making decisions for you, they can obviously inform the care providers, and they can be involved with medical staff and care teams about what care you need and what care you would have wanted had you been able to make a decision yourself. The other key to this is if your loved ones are around you wanting to make decisions about your care and they don't have a power of attorney in place, it's very difficult to have much legal standing against people like care providers and people who are paying for care, social workers, if you don't have this, because they obviously have legal authority to suggest what the best care is, and you would consider that, and your attorneys would consider that the best care for you. But if you want your attorneys to have people, your family to have the power to make those decisions, they'll need a lasting power of attorney in place, particularly if their decision is at odds and is in dispute with what the care providers want to do. Now, the other thing with lasting powers of attorney is you don't have to have solicitors to do it. You can apply online for your own power of attorney. What I would say about them is there were 22,000 power of attorney applications rejected by the courts last year. Sounds like a big number. It's not a colossal number when I tell you nearly 900,000 applications were received by the courts in the same period. But there is quite a structured process you have to go through to complete a power of attorney, and things have to be done in certain orders. So if you wanted the assistance of a solicitor to do it, we're more than happy to help you. We do it for a fixed fee. And the other thing to bear in mind, whether we do it or whether it's done yourself, there was quite a backlog with 900,000 applications a year. Obviously that's impacted by lockdown as well, but we're seeing they're taking about 16 weeks to be put in place at the moment. So 4 to 5 months, I would suggest, from start to finish. But those are my views on lasting powers of attorney. If you've got anything you want to raise in a Q&A session, please post any questions you have below this video or in the live session on Thursday evening. Thank you.